Have you ever heard the expression drowning in his booze? Or perhaps an offhand comment about someone's diet slowly killing them? Or what about this gem? You're slower than molasses in January. Well, in today's episode, we're going to explore food disasters. While we're at it, we'll find out just how fast molasses really is in January. Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Me, Myself, and I History, where weird history and strange happenings in the universe are always on the menu. My name is Seraphim. Today we're going to explore a few stories of food disasters. No, not like famines or cattle stampedes, actual imminent disasters that no one saw coming that burst upon the scene suddenly and then led to life or death circumstances. First up, hold my beer while we explore an event in London, England in 1814. The city of Westminster, a borough of London, is home to many famous sites. The Houses of Parliament are there, so is Buckingham Palace, Piccadilly, Westminster Cathedral, and many other famous locations. A great many famous events have taken place there, so have some lesser-known events like the following. In 1762, at the junction of Tottenham Court Road in Oxford, the Horseshoe Brewery was founded. Through the following decades, it changed hands several times, until in 1809 it landed in the possession of Sir Henry Muse, 1st Baronet, who had learned the brewing business from his father, who was himself a successful brewer. The Horseshoe Brewery made porter beer exclusively. It was likely the most popular porter beer in London at the time. Now, if you've ever been around a brewery, you know that the smell given off by the brewing process is not the nicest. Obviously, the wealthy would not want to live nearby. The area around the Horseshoe was no exception. It was filled with squalid, tightly packed housing, often with basements rented out to poor families as apartments. Part of the area at the rear of the brewery was a cul-de-sac known as the Rookery. The terrain in the area is fairly flat, leaving floods nowhere to go except simply to spread out. That's exactly what happened on the 17th of October, 1814. Except the flood wasn't from rainfall. The fermentation vats at the Horseshoe were massive. They held around 324,000 gallons, or 1,224,000 liters each. They were basically giant barrels. The workers would have to reposition steel bands that held these vats together every so often. While doing so on one, they noted that several bands were corroded and in need of replacement. They were told simply to reposition them and go about their business and file a report for maintenance. No harm whatever will come of it, the supervisor told them. The vat was filled to within 4 inches, or about 10 centimeters of the top, with 10-month-old porter. An hour later, the workers were on an upper level of the brewery, written report literally in hand, when, without warning, the vat burst open. The force of the gushing beer broke the stopcock off of another vat and destroyed several hogshead barrels of porter ready for sale stored nearby, adding their contents to the alcoholic tide. A 15-foot or 4.6-meter high wave of beer overflowed into the street. 8 people were killed and several homes were destroyed in the Rookery. People living in the basements had to scramble to get on furniture to avoid drowning in beer. No one in the brewery died, but 3 people had to be rescued from the rubble. The incident nearly bankrupted the company. The Washburn A Mill in Minneapolis, Minnesota was opened in 1874. Upon its completion, it was declared to be the largest flour mill in the world at the time. It was built adjacent to 5 other mills and contributed to the economic development of the city. At its peak, it could grind around 100 boxcars of wheat into 2 million pounds or 907,000 kilograms of flour per day. The Washburn A and other mills nearby were powered by the St. Anthony Falls in what is today downtown Minneapolis via a canal system that diverted some of the water for mechanical hydropower. At 6 p.m. on 2 May 1878, the day shift clocked out, and the 14 workers for the night shift started their day. Now, if you know anything about flour, you know that it is explosively flammable. Try tossing just a pinch on your next campfire if you don't believe me, but keep an extinguisher or a bucket of water nearby just in case. About an hour into the shift, the city was rocked by 3 rapid-fire explosions from the Washburn A mill. All 14 employees were instantly killed. Debris were launched hundreds of feet into the air. Granite foundation blocks were found up to 8 city blocks away. The explosion was heard 10 miles or 16 kilometers away in St. Paul. A massive fire broke out, putting out intense heat. The fire spread to 2 adjacent mills, which also exploded, killing 4 more people, including the owner of one of those mills. Firefighters fought the blaze all night, but struggled to contain it due to the intense heat of the fires. It was concluded later that 2 dry millstones rubbing together created an unexpected spark that landed in some built-up flour dust in the mill, triggering the explosive reaction. The explosion destroyed between 1/3 and 1/2 of the city's milling capacity. The Adelphi Distillery was built just south of the Victoria Bridge in Glasgow, Scotland in 1826 by brothers Charles and David Gray. It changed hands twice, landing in the possession of Distillers Company in 1902. Early in the morning of 21 November 1906, one of the washback vats on the top floor of the building burst open, releasing 50,000 gallons of wash, a spirit having a proof of 7 to 10 or 3.5 to 5% alcohol. When the wash vat burst, it broke open 2 similar vats adjacent to it. The alcoholic mixture began flowing down into the basement of the building where the DAF house is. The DAF house is where used malt is taken for reuse, often as animal feed. Several farmers were just outside the DAF house doors with their horse-drawn wagons to purchase malt for the animals. When the wash hit the malt, it was not only still red hot, but now it had a glue-like consistency because of the malt being mixed in. 2 farmers were inside the DAF house making their purchases at the time and were violently washed out of the building. Farmers and horses were washed across the street, and they had to struggle in the waist-deep mixture. Police arrived quickly and began the rescue. One farmer lost his life shortly after arriving in the infirmary from internal injuries sustained in the event. The 4 men on the top floor of the distillery had to escape from windows. A woman living nearby had her entire living room flooded with the gluey wash and the detritus, such as loose bricks and rocks that it had collected as it went down the street. The distillery was closed permanently in 1907 and was torn down in parts between the 1960s and 70s. The Purity Distilling Company had one location in the North End neighborhood of Boston on Commercial Street. They specialized in the distillation of ethanol for military and industrial applications. Their harborside facility was used to offload molasses from ships and to store it until it was needed at the distilling facility in nearby Cambridge, where it was shipped to by pipelines. The storage tanks were 50 feet or 15.25 meters high by 90 feet or 27.5 meters wide. At capacity, they held approximately 2.3 million gallons or 8,700 cubic meters of molasses. In cold weather, the molasses had to be warmed aboard ship before it could be pumped into the storage tanks due to the very high viscosity of cold molasses. On 15 January, the temperature had risen to an unseasonal 40 degrees Fahrenheit, or around 4.4 degrees Celsius, which was much higher than the freezing weather of just days earlier. The molasses in the tanks would be quite cold, perhaps nearly frozen still, due to the time it takes for the ambient temperature of holding tanks that large to match the weather. While the shipborne molasses did not need as much heating as normal, it was pumped in on top of already very cold molasses already stored in the tank. It is believed that a thermal reaction caused by the sudden heating of the inside of the tank as warm molasses came in on top of the cold caused a catastrophic failure of the tank's structure at around 12:30 in the afternoon. Now, molasses has a weight of 1.5 short tons or 1.4 metric tons per cubic meter. That's about 12 pounds per gallon, making it around 40% denser than water. That means a lot of potential energy was released. Rivets burst out of the tank like buckshot. Many people in the area reported hearing the explosion, and those nearby thought they felt an earthquake. The wave of molasses was 25 feet or 7.6 meters high at its peak. It flowed violently past the elevated train structure nearby, collapsing part of it. Nearby buildings were simply swept off their foundations and crushed. Several surrounding blocks were flooded from 2 to 3 feet or 0.6 to 1 meter deep with a sticky liquid. The air compression wave in front of the molasses hurled several people into the air and even blew a truck into Boston Harbor. At 12:45, Boston Police Patrolman Frank McManus shouted into his transmitter, "Send all available rescue vehicles and personnel immediately. There's a wave of molasses coming down Commercial Street." 21 people and a large number of horses were killed by asphyxiation as they were swept under the gooey tide of the now cooling molasses. More than 150 were injured. So numerous were the injured that a makeshift hospital was set up in a nearby building so surgeons could tend to the wounded. Red Cross nurses, police, Army, Navy, and even some maritime cadets from the Massachusetts Nautical School came to help. The search for survivors and collecting the bodies of the deceased lasted for 4 days. 4 persons swept into Boston Harbor were not found for 3 to 4 months afterwards. In the aftermath, 119 family members of the deceased filed a class action lawsuit against Purity Distilling's parent company. They received $7,000, the equivalent of around $127,000 today, for each of the victims. Boston Harbor was brown until midsummer. Hundreds helped in the cleanup, but sightseers and rubberneckers, as well as the cleanup and rebuilding crews, tracked molasses on their footwear all over the Boston metro area, and it took more than a year to clean up that part of the mess. So, just how fast is molasses in January? Apparently, it flows at around 35 miles per hour or 56 kilometers per hour. The next time someone accuses you of being slower than molasses in January, you can agree with them and readily say, and, as a matter of fact, so are you. The summer of 1951 had been unusually wet in France. While wet summers are a cyclical event anywhere that gets rain, it may well play into the next event in our sequence here. During the Vichy government, all grain was sold by farmers to the government of France, and bakers could obtain flour at set prices. This was a war measure. After World War II ended, this was somewhat relaxed, and surplus grain and/or flour could be sold locally direct to the user, while the majority would be sold to the government's agencies for export to other departments or out of country. That meant that the best grain was sold to the government at a better price, and leftover or lower quality grain was sold locally. In the town of Pont-Saint-Esprit in southwestern France along the banks of the Rhone River, a strange event was taking place. On 16 August 1951, the offices of the town's 2 doctors were suddenly filled with people all complaining of the same symptoms of food poisoning: vomiting and nausea, headaches, chills, and heat waves. Unlike simple food poisoning events, like most cases of salmonella, for instance, it didn't go away in a few hours to a day or two. Instead, they got worse. Soon, hallucinations and even convulsions began to affect people. On 24 August, a man believing himself to be an airplane jumped out of a window to his death. An 11-year-old boy tried to strangle his mother. In one case, a man jumped out of a window, breaking both legs on impact, and still began running away. In total, 7 people died, one from gangrene developed in her feet as a result of the poisoning. Soon the French national government swooped in and began an investigation. Because wheat grain was somewhat scarce and expensive that year, the French authorities had recommended that bakers use either rye or bean flour mixed in with the wheat. Both bakers in the town denied mixing anything, stating they were sold flour that made a gray-colored dough that tasted funny, but it was all they had, so they baked with it. No positive identification of the cause was made, but the majority, including 2 doctors from France who published in the British Journal of Medicine a month later, described what is almost certainly ergot poisoning. Ergot, or the Claviceps purpurea fungus, is a fungus that grows on rye when conditions are sufficiently wet. It can cause hallucinations and gangrene to grow on the extremities, leading to death in some patients. This is the consensus of most of those who have looked into this event. However, in his 2009 book, A Terrible Mistake, investigative journalist Hank Albarelli claims to have come across evidence of CIA involvement. This took place during the early days of the MK Ultra program at the CIA. One of the sub-programs was NK Naomi, which experimented with the use of LSD for various purposes. Albarelli claims the CIA deliberately poisoned the flower supply with LSD. The problem with his hypothesis is that LSD does not cause nausea or the fever chills cycle, nor the gangrene caused by this event, and the majority only suffered from those symptoms. It is possible, however, that the CIA had an interest in the event and dispatched officers to learn about the investigation as a possible tool for future use. What did the locals think about it? Well, many of them initially thought it was cursed bread. Our final event today took place in Lucknow, India in 2010. Akasha Food Products operates a small plant in Lucknow, India, where they made a variety of condiments and sauces like chili sauce, synthetic vinegar, and others. Among these is a tangy ketchup. The process starts by fermenting vegetables in a 6-meter deep vat. One worker was scooping fermented liquids off the surface when her ladder slipped. In rapid succession, 7 or possibly 8 more people went in trying to rescue her. When the authorities arrived and pulled them all out, all were taken to a local hospital. All but one were pronounced dead on arrival. The fermentation process creates toxic fumes that, when collected, knocked unconscious those who went in, after which they drowned in the vat of liquid. This became a real-life example of the urban legend of some guy who went into a vat or some container of another kind and then died as a result. And there you have it, food disasters that show we don't need volcanoes, megastorms, or protracted droughts to have disasters. Disasters might be as close as the food plant or the brewery across the street. Now, I don't want to be a Debbie Downer here, so I'd rather leave you on a positive note. So there's a fun factoid that is food-related, but a success instead of a disaster. Sir Arthur Guinness is world famous as the founder of the Guinness Brewery. He began by brewing ales in Leixlip, County Kildare, Ireland. His legacy has brought to us today a lineup of draft stout and extra stout dark beers that are sold around the world. Guinness is one of the most successful beers on earth. But did you know that he only became highly successful after leasing an empty brewery in Dublin at St. James Gate? On 31 December 1759, he signed a 9,000-year lease for £45 a year. It's easily the longest lease in history. It was later ended when the property was purchased and the brewery expanded from 4 to 64 acres. If you like this episode, please hit that like and subscribe button, and don't forget to hit that notification icon to be informed when more great stories drop. Then tell your family and friends who like weird history. Leave a comment if you have more to add to the story or just want to give your thoughts. Until next time, my friends, this is Seraphim with Me, Myself, and I History, signing off.